and welcome to the next in our study of women in the Bible. This week we're moving into the book of 2 Samuel, and two women who have experienced life in all of its extremities, that of Rizpah and of Bathsheba. Rizpah had really little or no control over her own life, yet she still managed to maintain a sense of the dignity of life. As a concubine of King Saul, she bore him two sons, Harmony and Mephibosheth, apparently a namesake of the son of David's beloved friend Jonathan. Concubines in the ancient world were considered property, though they were not slaves. Though afforded some protection by Mosaic law, they could be divorced more easily than wives. To sleep with the concubine of a king was considered an act of usurpation against the throne. I find a lot of these things quite confronting, and we have to acknowledge that I don't think God really was endorsing a lot of these things as these things went on, even at the highest echelons of Jewish society. Rizpah, one of King Saul's concubines, was caught in the middle of the political intrigue surrounding the king's death. Although Saul's army commander, Abner, remained the real power behind the throne, he named Saul's son Ishbosheth king. When Ishbosheth later accused Abner of sleeping with a royal concubine, the charge amounted to treason, since a king's harem usually passed to his heir. Abner was so angry that he determined to work to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and to set up the throne of David. You can read more in 2 Samuel chapter 3 and verse 10. Over the ensuing months, with Abner's help, David consolidated his power over all of Israel and was crowned king. Later, in the midst of a dreadful famine, David searched for a reason for what he interpreted as God's judgment on the land. Because it was due to King Saul's killing of the Gibeonites in violation of their ancient covenant with the Israelites, David inquired as to what would avenge their loss. Their reply was this: the death of 7 of Saul's descendants. Rizpah watched helplessly as her beloved sons were hanged because they were descendants of Saul. She paid a terrible price for the sins of Saul and his family. The grief of a mother's heart took the form of a fierce determination to watch over the bodies. Spreading her sackcloth, a sign of mourning, she protected the unburied bodies from the birds during the day and from the beasts during the night. When King David heard of Rizpah's long and lonely vigil over the corpses of her loved ones, he was moved to provide a proper burial for the bodies that Rizpah had shielded, as well as for King Saul and Jonathan, in the tomb of Saul's father, Kish. Though she was helpless to save them in life, Rizpah's courage in protecting those she loved in death was rewarded with the knowledge that her profound witness to decency and the dignity of the human body provided a proper burial for those over whom she had watched. Rizpah's reverence for life and respect for the bodies of her sons who had been executed contributed to God's favourable response to the nation, hearing and answering prayer. You can read more in 2 Samuel chapter 21 and verse 14. The second woman that we're looking at is probably much more well known, than Rizpah, that of Bathsheba. Bathsheba was the beautiful wife of Uriah the Hittite, who was a trusted and loyal commander in the king's army. When Bathsheba knew that she was pregnant by the adulterous encounter with King David, she sent word to the king. David brought her husband home from battle, hoping Uriah would enjoy intimacy with Bathsheba, and thereby perceive himself as the father of her unborn child. When this plan went awry, David arranged for Uriah's death on the battlefield, then sent his messengers and brought Bathsheba to his palace. Though perhaps she could have rejected the king's initial overtures, by this point she obviously had no choice in the matter. Did she realize that her husband's death was the result of deliberate orders by the king? What went through her mind in hearing the prophet Nathan's words of judgment on the king? When David came to comfort her after the death of their child, 2 Samuel chapter 12 and verse 24, did she recoil from the man whose lust for her had caused the death of a loyal and trusting husband and brought judgment on her child? She mourned for her husband, 2 Samuel 11:26, and her heart must have broken as she held her dying baby, watching helplessly as life slipped out of the tiny body. In spite of her love, and even the king's fasting and pleading before God for his son's life, the little one died. However, in due time, another son, Solomon, was born to her. As queen, she must have been aware of the various intrigues which occurred when David's sons rose up against him and vied with each other to take power from the king. When David was near the end of his life, Bathsheba heard rumblings that another of David's sons, Adonijah, had set himself up as king. Politically astute enough to realize that her own son's succession was in danger, she must have been grateful when the prophet Nathan presented a plan for ensuring the fulfillment of David's promise that Solomon would sit on his throne. Realizing he must act quickly to establish Solomon as the successor to the throne in the eyes of the people, David gave instructions for the high priest to anoint Solomon as king. Solomon then served as a co-regent until David's death. As Queen Mother, Bathsheba enjoyed additional respect and exercised authority over the women of the king's house. Bathsheba lived long. She had been a victim of a king's lust, a grieving mother, a political schemer, and a revered queen mother. Her experiences encompassed the worst and the best, the heights and the depths of human circumstance and emotion. But perhaps the notoriety of her scandalous adultery is ultimately overshadowed by her legacy as mother of the wisest of Israel's kings. Thanks very much.